Well, we're giving people time to gather by doing a little bit of an introduction. For those of you that don't know me and don't know Strategy Leaders, this company was founded actually almost 30 years ago at this point, and it was based on research that was done at Columbia University on how to increase the success rates of privately held small business and thereby contribute to the future of the US economy in the 21st century. And it was fascinating work. I got to do it with Professor Bruchet, who was in the Alan Nevins Chair for Economics, and it was just one of the most wonderful gifts in my life. And coming out of Columbia, I then said, this is great work and I want to continue doing this. It built on all of the experiences I'd had in my career at that point in time. And so we started Strategy Leaders, as I said, nearly 30 years ago. At this point in time, we have a skilled team of employees who are all specialists at working on growth and development with the owners and their management teams in privately held businesses. That's really our specialty. And we have experience over those 30 years in working in lots of different industries. And as we look at, hang on one second, I'm just going to mute my phone because I forgot to do that. Bear with me a second. There we go. So as we've worked over the 30 years, it is fascinating to me how many ways business owners find in order to build a business and make a living. In terms of our work, we do have a nationwide footprint, north to south, east to west, all the coasts, and the central part of the country. And we work with a broad set of services that I'm going to take you through in just a second. So if you go to the next page, Dahlia, and let's take a look at those services. We do provide valuations. This is a service that we developed over 10 years ago at the request of our clients to be able to provide actionable information that gets both sellers and buyers onto the same page in terms of what their business is worth and what they should be looking at. We do help our clients build key performance indicators. We do forecasting and what if modeling, so they begin to build a picture of what the future could look like under various conditions. And then that is often linked with our business growth programs that include business plans and accountability reporting. We help a lot of businesses with their transition planning and the implementation of transitions. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. We do a lot of management team development, so moving people up to the next level, making sure that they are capable of running the business and getting the monkey off of the owner's back is how I like to term it. We do a lot of executive coaching, so working one-on-one with owners and individuals in the organization to help them better understand their roles, their responsibilities, and how to get where they want to go in their careers and in their companies. We do buy-sell advisory, so helping business owners who are either looking to get in by acquiring or get out, but it's time to exit. One of the things that's most interesting to me is the statistics from the business broker websites that say something like 90% of the deals that get started never get over the finish line. And that is a huge cautionary tale because it's obviously only a done deal if you get it over the finish line. And so as we work with our clients on how to get it over the finish line, our focus is working with all parties to ensure that we can get a deal that everybody can live with. And then finally, we do a lot of next generation training and development. So either employees, family members that are looking to join the firm or are already in the firm and looking to go to the next level, or bringing in new talent to help in the process of growing the business. As it says here, if you're looking for any information or you have questions, please let us know who you are, and we'd love to explore the possibilities. We don't charge for our time to get to know you. I love talking to business owners about what they're doing. If it's something that we can help with, we'll let you know, and if it's not, we'll give you advice on where else to look. So with that, I think we've given people a good amount of time to gather, and let's start with today's webinar, growth by acquisition. And we're going to go through 3 sections. One, understanding what growth through acquisition is and why to pay attention to it, what the process is in a step-by-step guide, and then what it's going to take to integrate the acquired business. We're going to touch on that, but given the limitations of today's schedule, we aren't going to dig into that. It is something that we will get to in the as the next in the series. And if you are interested in that, please let us know, and we'll make sure you get an invitation when we get ready to do that next webinar. We are going to wrap up today with a Q&A section, so please put your questions into the chat window, send them over to Dahlia. She'll be happy to bring them up at the end of the webinar. And if you would like to talk with us, please, my email and Robin's emails are at the bottom of this page. Feel free to reach out to us by email or put a request in the chat window to Dahlia, and Dahlia will make sure we get in touch with you. So with that, let's get started. And we're going to start with understanding what this topic of growth through acquisition is all about. And I'm going to start with the challenges. So what we see in small business, and this again goes right back to the research with Bruchet, is that small to mid-sized businesses tend to stall out or hit a ceiling and then get to a point where they lack the resources to go further. And that could be that they're outgrowing the benefits of a multitasking model. So privately held small businesses start out with everybody in the organization multitasking, and at some point they can't cover that enough ground, or they need more specialists with higher level of skills. A lot of companies find that their marketing and sales at some point become insufficient to keep growing at the pace they need to grow, or they find out that they can grow, but operations can't keep up on the delivery side. And so it's kind of which side of the puzzle are you running into? Many companies need to build additional processes, bring in additional knowledge, and add talent to the business. Some run into trouble because their financial model is weak, and until they get fixed, it won't support the growth of the business. And then some business owners just get comfortable with where they are and they stop pushing to drive the business forward. In all of these cases, the problem is that as the business begins to stall out, it actually, as the growth level flattens, the business begins a very subtle flattening and then downward spiral that is very hard to see for a long period of time until it has picked up so much momentum that it's difficult to turn it around. So Dahlia, if you want to go to the next page, and we'll take a look at some of the other things that you want to think about. When business owners grow their businesses, they start out in most cases with organic growth. So organic growth is I'm just going to add a customer, I'm going to add an employee, I'm going to add another customer, another employee, another service, and so on. And they get used to this one step at a time growth. When they think about acquiring an acquisition, that's not something that they are real comfortable with. They're often unsure what to pursue. Many business owners have a fear of failure. They think that acquisitions can be a big leap forward, but it's a scary leap. And then, as I said, 1 deal in 10 actually gets over the finish line in most cases. And so there are failures in trying to get a deal done, and then that makes people twice as cautious or 3 times as cautious the second or the third time it fails. And then most businesses are unprepared to play the acquisition game, and that means limitations to funding, advisors. They don't have the right advisors in place. They don't have the right insiders, that is employees in the firm designed to work on the projects, and they don't have the right systems set up. So these are the kinds of things we're going to talk about today. Now, having talked about the negatives around why we don't get into acquisitions as readily as we could, let's go to the next slide and talk about why we should be pursuing acquisitions. And I like to say it's all about opportunity, and there are tons of things you can add to the business. The top of the list is revenue and profit. So instead of organic growth, where you're going to spend money in order to bring on a new service or bring on a new employee in order to take on more work, so you're spending before you get forget, when you're doing an acquisition, you're actually getting as fast or faster than you're spending. It is an opportunity to add clients, so new clients, different clients, products and services, new ones or different ones. So you can cross-sell old products and services to the new clients and new products and services to your old clients, which is the best marketing mix you can have. It's an opportunity to get into additional markets, add geography. And then on the other side of the equation, it's also an opportunity to add know-how. So bring on talent, bring on systems, bring on people that can add to the talent pool that you already have in place in the business. Now, in addition to that, in terms of why to pursue acquisitions, there are some significant benefits. So let's go to the next slide, Dahlia. In general, acquisitions will give you much faster growth compared to an organic expansion. It will give you instant access to customers, talent, and resources. It will help your business take advantage of economies of scale. So as you grow, it tends to cost less to do things. We have a client right now that is absolutely finding the benefit of that as they double in size, the cost of all of the systems that they have is already spent, and they're not going to have to double that cost as they grow the business. So they are going to make a lot more money on this next round of revenue and revenue increase. There are certainly operational efficiencies to be had as you build the size of the business. Generally contributes to financial stability when you do it right, and that also can make a company much more competitive and add to market strength. We have a client, for example, that looked at their market, found that the next largest competitor was aging out and was getting ready to sell, and they went after it very aggressively. And by taking on that next largest competitor, they then got command of the market, and they were able to increase their pricing very significantly right after they did the acquisition, because people had fewer choices about where to go in order to get the level of quality or services that they were offering. So you got to really think about, there's leverage to be had in this. Now let's get into what is an acquisition. So in terms of what I like to think about when talking to people about what's an acquisition, it is, in its simplest terms, an addition to the business where you're either extending your reach or your scope, or you're adding talent. It is a way to solve startup challenges for some people. So I want to get in and I don't want to bootstrap my way up in the first round. Now that takes some doing to do it that way, but it can be done. It is an opportunity to leverage a legacy into the future. So if your business is more of a legacy business, it's an opportunity to make a leap into the future, or you may be able to combine somebody else's legacy business with what you're doing, and again, enhance the model. And it can be a way to reward valued employees by giving them something greater to work on, a new set of challenges and opportunities, and maybe even an ownership stake in the business. And certainly it is a way also for business owners, I think they don't think about this often enough, for business owners to get out of the business by selling to the employees. I think too many owners make the mistake of thinking their employees could never afford to do it. And that's just not true. It is possible for them to afford it, and you need to learn how to do that. Let's go to the next slide. So there are different kinds of acquisition targets. You can go and buy competitors. You can look at supply chain extensions by buying up a supplier or looking at a distribution source. You can go look at a complementary business. So somebody that's doing something that is similar or an extension of your business, and now you can get into that business without having to bootstrap your way through it and build all that knowledge from the ground up. You can also get into an entirely different kind of business. You have to be careful there to make sure that it's not so different that it causes challenges in the takeover. You can, as I said earlier, you can look at acquiring an employer. So if you're an employee, I want to own this business, I want to run it someday, or as an employer, I want to sell this to my employees. There are ways to do that. And then it is certainly you need to look at what kind of expertise, talent, process, and know-how you want to add to your business, and build a shopping list around that, which we'll get into in a little bit. Now, in terms of types of acquisitions, there are two main types that you need to be aware of. One is an equity, which we call lock, stock, and barrel. So I'm buying up all assets and liabilities, disclosed and undisclosed. So just because they didn't tell you that they have a big debt due for sales tax or for workers' comp, you're still going to be on the hook for it. And that's something you have to be very careful of. There are advantages to buying lock, stock, and barrel, but there are also downsides. And then an asset, which is most common with outsiders, is where you're buying the assets of the business and not taking on the liabilities. But be careful here, because it does not include all assets when you do an asset purchase. So, for example, most of the extended accounts receivable and a large chunk of the cash on hand stays with the seller, unless there are covenants around it. So what type of deal do you use? Here's some questions you want to ask. Are insiders involved? Do the new stakeholders have business history? How risky are the underlying finances, and how confident are you that there's nothing hidden? So if there are insiders involved, then an equity may be a much more appropriate way to go about buying the business. Certainly if the new stakeholders do not have business history, so again, in the case of employees, they don't have any other business to use to buy the business, then you probably are going to need to do an equity deal. Let's go on to the next page and get into ways that you can finance the business. You can self-finance it. You can go through traditional lending, that is, go directly to a bank, or if the bank wants protection on the loans, they'll get the SBA involved. So you have to make sure you've got an SBA lender. Again, this whole field of banking and SBA is very challenging. There are lots of opportunities out there, but it is a bit of a marathon to go through. And my recommendation is to work with a banking broker or a financing broker to get help in terms of picking the right choice, and then going through the application process and sticking with it to the end. You can also look at seller financing. So a lot of times the seller will take some or all of the deal. It gets a little risky for the seller, depends on how well they know the buyer and how comfortable they are with the buyer. Oftentimes there will be a commission involved. So if the company hits a certain revenue target, then the seller might get more money. And there is also a question of, will the seller be involved post-sale? And that's another way that money can be passed to the seller. So for example, we worked with a client and they were going to have the seller stay engaged for 5 years post-sale, and it allowed them to pass money to the seller that supported what the seller was looking to accomplish long-term, and for the company to get their hands on the expertise and talent of the seller for the period of time that they knew they were going to need him around. All of this stuff basically says a deal is negotiable. There is no single number that you're going to focus on, that this is what the business is going to sell for. And that's oftentimes, I think, why it gets hard to get deals over the finish line, is everybody gets lost in the planning and negotiation of what the seller wants and the buyer wants and how to accomplish that. And that's the kind of stuff that we're just really experts at, solving those problems. So let's go to the next slide and just keep in mind there are risks and challenges. One of the biggest ones is that the buyer ends up overpaying for the business. And this is something I really encourage you to be aware of. Just because the seller says this is what it's worth doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. We'll get into what we can do to help you with that in the acquisition step-by-step process that we're going to go to next, but let's stay here for a minute. There are also situations in which the deal either can't or won't get done. We have a situation right now where the seller is having a really tough time actually separating from the business. So as much as she said, look, I want to sell this business, she keeps throwing up roadblocks along the way. There can often be cultural and operational integration issues. We think differently from the company we're acquiring, we behave differently, we do our things differently, and these can get in the way when you're looking at how do we have a unified organization going forward. There can be things that prop up financially after you get into the deal. You have a loss of some clients, you have some negotiations on contracts that don't turn out the way that they were proposed, suppliers' prices increase. You've got to be prepared to manage your way through that stuff. You also have to be prepared to manage change with employees and customers, and I would say also with vendors as well. So you're going to have to get the seller's support structure on board and working with you and motivated to stick around. And then obviously integrating diverse populations is always a challenge, and you've got to have people on your team who are prepared to do that work. So now with that, let's get into a step-by-step process. And we're going to just take you through step one is defining your acquisition strategy. And there are 3 sections to this. So the first section is, what are your business goals? And there are a set of questions here that I would suggest you answer. You write out the answers, you have them down on paper. So how much revenue and profit do you need? How hard do you want to work? What's your team interested in doing next? How long does an acquisition need to last? So is this, 3 years and then I'm going to be out as well with the newly formed company, or this has got to get us 20 years down the road? Very different answers in terms of who you might be looking at. What kind of competing priorities do you have within your business and in the marketplace? What's your end game? What are you trying to accomplish here? And then how quickly do you need to get this done? Is there something that's compelling you to have to act very quickly, or you know what, we've got 1 or 2 years to get this done? Very different approaches. Now let's go to identifying the right kinds of businesses. So in terms of I've got another set of questions here for you to go through. What's your business known for? Do you want to do one big deal or multiple small deals? What gaps do you have to fill within your organization? How much change can your team take on? What else do your customers want? What can you afford to pay? And how much risk are you willing to take? Again, I would put these down on paper. I would write out your answers. And so you spend some time looking at this and get comfortable with, okay, these are my answers, because that's going to also shape who you're going to look for and in what time frame. And then thirdly, the third part of this is industry considerations. So Dahlia, if you can go to the next slide. And these are some questions you want to ask about the industries that you're going to look at. So who's got growth trends? So you don't want to buy a buggy whip manufacturing business. You want to buy a business of the future. So a lot of times, you have to look at what do you know in your own portfolio about businesses that seem to be growing, and what can you do to pursue businesses in those markets? What markets can deliver the margins you want? So if they're growing fast, but they're not making any money, that's not going to be as valuable to you as a business that has a really good margin. How long do you need the market to last? So again, this is a corollary to the previous page. What's the talent profile? So what do you have in your company? What do you want to bolt onto that? And what do you need to see in terms of a talent profile in the company you're looking to acquire? I also encourage you to take a look at what's the employment portfolio. So are there enough future workers? So there are some industries that are really constrained. There just aren't enough people going into the field. And you want to be careful about that, because that means that A, it's going to be hard to find people, and B, it's going to cost you more money in the future to retain your workforce and build on it. Do you like the customers and vendors in the industries you're looking at? You don't want to get into a business where you go into business, come to work every day and you go, I hate these guys. That's just, there's no point. There's no fun. And then are you comfortable doing this kind of business? So, when you look at a business to take on, is it a stretch? Like you're trying to buy an engineering firm and you know nothing about engineering versus you're buying a business that you know something about this industry is going to generally be much more successful. Or you're an engineer already and just buying another engineering firm, maybe they do something different, but you understand how engineering firms work. That's a much more successful model. So with that, let's talk about step 2, which is getting ready. You want to set up your acquisition team of advisors. So in terms of a team of advisors, you're going to need somebody who's going to be your strategist, who can work on negotiating the deal. You're going to need an attorney who can basically do the contracts that you're going to need. You're going to need an accountant who can advise you on the financial outcomes and help you, theoretically help you with budgets and forecasting. And I would say that I want you to be careful about not hiring, for example, a real estate attorney to do contracts in a business environment, because there are things that they may miss that are just, they're going to pull boilerplate because it's not their wheelhouse and they're going to miss things. So be careful to this may not be an attorney that you're already working with, or maybe if you're lucky it is. You do need to decide, are we going to look for an asset purchase or a stock purchase? So going back to the earlier section, you've got to line up financing. So this is kind of like going to look for a house. I would start early and talk to banks, or shore up cash in your bank account, or know how much seller financing you want, but figure out how you want to go about financing the size of the deal that you're hoping to do. And then you need to start to do outreach to find ready sellers. You need to assign resources in your company who are going to be working on the deal. You need to do that early on, because they've got to cross-train people to do what they're doing now, so that they can step forward and work on the acquisition deal without having to do it at midnight and on the weekends. You want this to be something that's going to be front and center for them. And then you also have to define your post-acquisition team and the people that will replace them in your current company as they move on to either short-term or long-term, make sure that the acquisition goes well. So that's part of getting ready. Now, in terms of understanding the deal stages, there are several stages to doing an acquisition. I got a typo there. So it's initial peak, P-E-E-K. We'll fix that for next time. But you want to do an initial peek at the business. And this is an offering paper, perhaps, that the company puts together. It could be a one-pager that says, we're in this business, we have this many employees, we have this is our customer profile, we work in these industries, and so on. And then you may want to start looking at the details under that. So you could ask, for example, for a redacted list of customers, so you can see customer history over 3 or 4 years, see who's growing, who's dropping off. Same thing with employees. You'd look for a redacted list of employees, so you know what's being paid to whom, what kind of benefits people have. Once you get, and you can do the same thing for vendors as well. By redacted, I mean you get a list of all the customers, and the seller builds a table that just equates the name to a number, and you get the list as customer 1, customer 2, customer 3. When you actually get into contracting, you'll go back and compare. You'll actually get the list upon which it was based with the real numbers or real names disclosed. Now, once you've had an initial peek at the business, you then are going to, and I would say there's a valuation in there usually that you'll want to look at in that initial peek. Once you've had a look at the business, then if you're serious about it, you're going to talk to the business owner, seller, you're going to define some terms, and you're going to get down on paper what's called a letter of intent. So this is what we're planning to offer for the business. And you present this to the seller, you guys go back and forth, maybe negotiate it a little bit. get in the ballpark of you're both on the same page, and then you start what's called due diligence. So this is where you're going to send in a team, and they're going to comb through the company. They're going to look at the systems, they're going to look at the finances of the business, they're going to look at customer history in more detail. They're going to make sure it's really where I call kicking the tires. They're going to make sure that auto can run. Once they've done due diligence, if you find that there are gaps in your understanding from your initial understanding to where you are now, you may go back and modify what you were offering, and then you're going to prepare a contract of sale. The contract of sale is the legally binding document that the seller and the buyer are going to both sign. And when you go through a contract of sale, the terms, you need to be aware, the terms can change substantially from the letter of intent. And this is something when we're working with sellers that I really caution them to be very careful about, because a lot of times sellers will get really tired in the process and they just want to push it over the finish line, and they end up giving up things that they had not intended to when they did the original letter of intent. Now, as a buyer, that strategy could play to your advantage. And then once you do the contract of sale and everybody's signed it and it's now your company, then there is what's called post-sale due diligence. So you again are going to go back in, and with somewhere within 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the size of the deal and what you've agreed to in the contract of sale, you're going to confirm that everything was there, is there, and you probably will have some holdbacks in terms of what you're going to pay the seller that allow you some flexibility if you find gaps in what was being conveyed. Okay, so that's the deal stages. Let's talk now about finding the right business to acquire. And I put business brokers at the top of the list, not because that's my primary recommendation, but it's a common one. A lot of people do talk to business brokers. If you're going to go the business broker route, just again, be aware that business brokers in general will say that they have a fairly low success rate in terms of getting deals over the finish line. They also tend to overestimate the value of the business. So they're a bit in the people-pleasing business with the seller, of talking to the seller about, this is what you want for the business. Okay, let's list it for that, whether or not that makes sense. As a buyer, you're going to have to pay the business broker's fees on top of whatever the seller is being told the business broker has told them that the business is worth. So just, it can get expensive. There are a lot of other ways that you can go and find people to buy without going the business broker out. So you can do direct outreach, you can mail out letters, you can make phone calls to people. If you know people in your industry, you can put the word out, I'm looking to buy one of these. You can go through industry networks, either ones that you're part of or industry networks that the seller targets are belonging to, and put the word out, ask if they have a board to list businesses for sale. And you'd be surprised how many industry associations and have actually those kinds of listing boards. Join LinkedIn groups and put the word out there. You can go through friends and family. You never know who knows who. And I would include in the friends and family vendors and advisors that you work with. Just keep putting the word out. Go to conferences to look at the kinds of companies you want to buy, and then keep walking around and telling people, I'm looking to buy one of these. You know, if you know somebody, please send them my way. As I said earlier, associations, and then clearly advisors. So that's how you go and find people. Again, the broader the outreach, the more likely that you will find more than one business to look at, which will be an advantage because now you can compare the pros and cons of each. So now let's talk about the criteria you want to use to evaluate your targets. You want to make sure that you do look at evaluation early on. I can't tell you how many business owners come to me and they say, hey, I've already got a deal ready to go, and I just, I want to make sure it's okay. Can you look at it for us? And then we do evaluation at that point, and it just doesn't support the deal. Or the bank also will weigh in and say it doesn't support the deal. don't spend days, hours, weeks, months on a deal that you don't know what it really should be paid, or should be purchased for. Get a valuation up front. Make sure that the business is seller independent. So the business has to be able to operate without the seller. We looked at a business last year. We really liked the business. We liked their target market, but when we got into it, everything in that business depended on the seller being there, and it was pretty clear that seller was going to be out within 6 to 9 months. So it made no sense to buy the business. You want to make sure as you get to know the seller that you build a trust basis for doing business. So you want to make sure that you can work with them, you like them, you guys can get along, you can do business together. You want to look for value add contributions. So what's this going to add to my business? What is the multiplier on this? Not just in terms of the cost, but how is it going to make my business more profitable, stronger, more revenue, more bottom line? And then do make sure that the seller has control and can legally make the deal. I've had a couple in the last couple of years where the buyer was going down the path, and then we got into asking for tax returns to document what was going on, and found out that the person they were talking to was a minority owner. And when we contacted the majority owner, they were like, "No, we're not selling. Forget it. Or we're not selling under these conditions. They don't have our authorization." So be very careful there that you actually are talking to someone, and the questions to ask is, what's the corporate structure? Is it an S corp, an LLC, a C corp? And what share ownership do you have? And what covenants do you have with the other shareholders that either enable or restrict your ability to make decisions? Let's go to the next slide, Dahlia. Here are some red flags that you really want to watch out for. Unrealistic seller expectations is a big one. So very often sellers approach selling their business not based on what the business is worth, but what they need in order to retire. As a buyer, that just isn't your problem. But if the seller can't make enough and you can't solve that problem with future earnings, then you may not have a deal to get done here, because you don't want to overpay for the business. And even if you're willing to pay a little bit more, you got to be careful, because the bank may not approve the deal or finance the deal. You want to look at sellers who are throwing up roadblocks. So again, that lady that I was talking about a little bit before, every time we turned around, she was trying to negotiate another term and renegotiate another term. And what it really turned out was she was so attached to the business, she was having a lot of difficulty letting go. And she really wasn't even conscious of that. Were we able to work through it? Yeah. But boy, it costs a lot of time and energy to do that. Make sure that the financials do prove out. So when you bolt this onto your business, what does the bottom line look like? And is that bottom line enough to allow you to be able to pay off the cost of any loans you're going to take on and make more money in a very reasonable period of time? And by all means, be very, very wary when you start getting inconsistent stories. So take really good notes every time you talk to the seller and the seller's advisors, and then go back and compare the notes and say, they're talking about this growth rate, but then they're talking about this growth rate, or they're talking about these customers lasting a long time, but then they're talking about these customers going through a revolving door. Make sure that it all adds up, because there are a lot of people out there who are willing to make up a story about what's going on that may not be the truth. Now let's go to the next slide, step 4. And step 4 is about valuing the business. And I will tell you, this is an essential tool. Get it done up front. I advise my buyers, if you haven't got a deal started, that when you talk to a seller, the first thing you ask them is, do you have a valuation that is done by a reputable organization? And by reputable, somebody that's following NACFA principles. If you want to get into more of what makes a good valuation, come and talk to us. We do webinars on that from time to time, and can definitely get you information on that. make sure that the seller is serious and realistic. So they're not trying to fill their retirement plan coffers. They're trying to sell the business at a reasonable price for that business. Make sure that you don't overpay for the business or the valuation. So valuations can get really pricey really fast. Don't go there. I love the system that we use because it's quick, it's relatively speaking inexpensive, and it gives you a very accurate picture of the trading range of the value as well as the strengths and weaknesses of the business. And it gives you multiple looks at if you bought it under these conditions or bought it under those conditions. It's so information rich, and it gives us a basis for then having a detailed conversation with the buyer about what their options are. Make sure that in your valuation, as you're looking at the value of the business, you get insight into cash flow and leverage, that you understand the seller's underlying challenges, that you're looking at a valuation that has multiple value perspectives. So it's not just, I ran a cash flow performance. That's one method of valuing, but you also need comps in the market, and you need to look at other like businesses in that industry that are selling under special conditions. And then you have to understand the different approaches to buying or a business. So equity sale, asset sale, liquidation value, and so on. Now, in terms of evaluating the target, the next thing that we're going to talk about is financial due diligence. So Dahlia, if you can go to the next slide. So when you're talking about doing financial due diligence, you want to look at the profitability, cash flow, the debts, the report quality, and you want to get tax returns to support this information. Why tax returns? Because they're the only document in this opaque world of privately held businesses that if somebody signs it and lies on it, they do face the potential to go to jail. And that's the only place you can go, that there should be some reasonable expectation that this is accurate information. It's not a guarantee, but it's a reasonable expectation. You do want to look at the customer and sales status. So look at their CRM system, look at what kind of pipeline they have, who are the players in their company, and both in terms of customers as well as people involved in sales and customer service. What are their roles? What is the commitment to providing customer service, for example? Is that similar to what you guys do? Is it more or less? If it's more, are you prepared to take on those responsibilities? What kind of agreements are in place with customers? So how long are they going to have to stick around? Is there a requirement that the contract can be transferred from the seller's organization to your organization, or is the contract null and void? Are there any covenants in the contracts that say you can't work with another kind of firm that does this, or you can't have competitor firms or competitive vendors? So you've got to be really careful about the agreements that are in place with the customers. And then you also want to look at the promises that are being made to customers, and what the sales organization is putting out there. You want to make sure that you do an operational review, what kinds of teams, processes, quality, what's in their supply chain, what's available in the supply chain. You go through legal and compliance checks. As I was saying before, are there contract exclusions? Are there any debt covenants? And are there any industry regulations that you can run afoul of? And then you want to look at workforce loyalty. And are there golden handcuffs in place for key players? Are there any competitive threats? Are the employees likely to go out the door as soon as the deal is done? Are there any essential employees that you absolutely have to hang on to once this deal gets done? Now, we're going to go with a quick overview to integrating the acquired business. So if you go to the next page, I'm sorry, getting to contract, I forgot that one. So you do want to, in terms of getting to a contract, and this starts with the LOI, you want to ask the seller for a wish list. It's the easiest way to start the negotiations. Some sellers have it, some sellers don't, some sellers won't share it if they do. But you've got to get something down on paper that you and the seller can look at and talk about. These are the things you want to accomplish. How long do you want to stay around? What kind of income do you want post-purchase? What do you want to have happen to your employees, your customers, how much do you really want for the business, that kind of stuff. And then you make an offer and you detail the terms of the offer and convey it to the attorneys, who then confirm those terms in a letter of intent. You conduct due diligence. I talked about that a little bit before. You negotiate any changes in terms because of the due diligence and things that popped up. And then you prepare a contract of sale and you set up a time and place to close. I want to just go back for a second on that due diligence. We have a deal that we just finished where the buyer, who we were working with, got into the client and said, they've said they were working with this CRM system, which we're very familiar with, but we got in there and they're about an inch deep in terms of their understanding about how to use it. So their people are going to have to be trained and learn to use new systems. And the data that's in there is extremely limited and difficult to work with. That's going to cost the seller some money. All right, so now let's go to integrating the acquired business. This is going to be our last slide in this series. And as I said, in terms of successful post-acquisition integration, we are going to do another webinar down the road that will get into the details of this. But this is a place that I think a lot of businesses make a big mistake. They spend all their time and energy on finding and making a deal, and then they're like, okay, we're done. And this is actually where the real work begins. If you're going to be successful with your acquisition, you got to make a plan and follow it. You've got to work to align and people and customers and prevent disruption. You've got to pay attention to the outward look of the business. So social media, brand, website, sales proposals, sales presentations. You've got to address any disconnects that are out there. Make sure that you've got goals and KPIs set up so you're measuring the performance of both the new business and also the existing business, because keep in mind, you're probably going to pull some people out of the existing business. So you've got to make sure that you watch that one doesn't falter while you're putting time and energy into taking over the new business. And then make sure that everybody who is on the acquisition team or the post-acquisition team does have time to reflect and talk about what's going on and document lessons learned and make adjustments, typically on a quarterly basis, to how we're going to go forward. So with that, we're going to give you a minute of advertisement here. How can strategy leaders help? We help our clients in a lot of ways, both in terms of growing their businesses and in terms of acquiring businesses, brainstorming, figuring it out, assessing what has to happen, providing training and coaching, preparing the next generation so the company survives, assisting with the ownership opportunities and transitions, making sure that they happen correctly, building the thriving company that is run by confident owners and managers, gets the monkey off the owner's back, and then creates wealth for our clients. So this is the stuff we stand on. These are the values that we look at providing to our clients in terms of the assistance with buying and selling businesses. And before we go to Q&A, just something else to be aware of. If you go to the next slide, our next webinar is going to be on April 10th. It's about From Chaos to Clarity, building a cost-effective marketing plan that works. There is a QR code here. Feel free to grab that if you're interested, or just put your email into the chat window and Dahlia will make sure that Nick or someone else gets you an invitation to that webinar if you're interested. And with that, let's just stay here so they can get this QR code if they want it. Dahlia, let's go to Q&A. We got a few minutes left, and let's see if we can stump the presenter.
Sounds good. Thank you, Andy.
Yep.
So for our first question, so what are some of the best ways to identify acquisition targets?
I think the best way is to have multiple approaches. I do like going through the industry, as long as you're not trying to do this confidentially, because the word can get out across the industry and it can multiply in terms of people that become aware. I do like actually pulling a list of business owners who are over 65 and that are in industries you're interested in, and sending them confidential letters to see if they're interested in exploring a potential acquisition, and then having someone do phone outreach to follow up and see if they're interested in having a talk. Because a lot of times, while they may not have spent a lot of time thinking about it, they're at a place and time where they should be ready to think about it, and that may make them more interested in having a conversation with you.
Awesome. Great answer. So this is a question I think probably a lot of people wonder. What are some red flags that my business is not ready for an acquisition?
Great. So if you look at your management team and your employee population, and you say, there is no way that I could pull a single individual away from what we're doing now to work on this acquisition, that's a problem. I would suggest, if that is a problem, start hiring from the bottom up and moving people up so that they can develop a little bit of free time. But if you're going at 110% with the workforce that you've got, you're not going to be able to pay attention to this acquisition, either in the due diligence process or in the takeover process, in the way that you would want to in order to have a smooth transition.
Great. Can you talk a bit about some financial red flags people should look for during the due diligence process?
So, and that was going to be the other thing I was going to say about a red flag, I'm not ready, is you also do need to have money set aside to do a deal. You're typically going to have to put at least 10 or 20% down. You may not have to finance the whole deal. We have one right now where the seller is selling to an employee and is going to finance the deal for 3 years with a fixed amount of payments over that 3 years, including interest. And at the end of 3 years, then the employee will go to the bank and get a loan. And that allows the employee to kind of control what's happening in terms of payments right now and not have to deal with the bank yet, but get involved in taking over the business. The owner is going to stay on for 3 years anyway. And now they just have to make sure that the cash flow and the P&L work and the balance sheet work in order to be able to afford the additional payments. So red flags, make sure that you can afford to do the deal, make sure that you've got money set aside, 10 to 20% down, and then make sure you've got money set aside in order to do some of the upfront investment. So we've got a client right now that they're pretty stretched right now. They do have some loans coming through that will allow them to be able to do some upfront investment in inventory purchases and so on, but they're having to take it out of cash flow right now, and it's kind of hurting until those loans come in place. Would have been better if they had gotten those loans ahead of time.
Great. So sorry, I'm just looking through these. Do you guys help with ensuring seller financing terms work in my favor?
I mean, again, we represent whoever has hired us, and we're going to give you advice on, here's how to get this deal done and how badly you want it and how profitable it's going to be. I will tell you that a deal in general is one where the seller gives up a little bit and the buyer gives up a little bit. They meet in the middle. Nobody got exactly what they wanted, but everybody can live with the deal. So I think you need to be prepared for that. But keep in mind, we like working on the buyer side a lot. And in working on the buyer side, our job is to give you advice on how best to get this deal done and to look at the options. We have right now a situation where the seller was not really willing to move. And so in the negotiations, we established 2 prices. This is what we're willing to pay today. If we don't have an agreement inked in the next 3 weeks, then the price is going to go to this. And it's not going to be such a favorable price. And we're at the same time already starting to look at other acquisition targets in case this one does fall through.
Great. Are there any legal issues that you think people should be aware of before signing a deal?
Lots of them, lots of them. Again, legally, are you allowed to work in this industry? So, if you're not an engineer, buying an engineering firm has challenges because there are requirements that a principal of the firm is a registered engineer, for example, or an architect, same thing. You do need an advisor on the team who is an attorney, who is experienced at doing purchases of businesses. So contracts of sale in the exchange of businesses, which is very different from a really good real estate lawyer, for example. You want to make sure that you have somebody who also understands the industry that you're acquiring, so they can give you advice on here are challenges in the industry. They need to look at banking covenants. So what are you taking over in terms of banking covenants, if anything? What are you going to have to do with those covenants? Can you live with them, or do you need to buy those loans out? That kind of stuff.
Great answer. This is a really good question. I think you'll like this one, Andy. If I'm planning to sell my company in the future, how will acquisitions affect my exit plan?
I think acquisitions are a great way to go. They allow you to bolt on new markets or additional markets, additional revenue, additional profits. And again, make sure you do deals that are going to prove out within 1, 2, 3 years. If you're going to sell in less than 3 years, I'd be careful and think twice about doing it. But if you've got 3 years to play with yet, these are a great way to add on to the business, and then you're selling a bigger business. And generally, the larger the business, the greater the multiple that you're going to be looking at getting for the business.
This is probably a great question to end on. What is one piece of advice that you'd give to someone considering their first acquisition?
Believe it or not, as much work as we have in here that we've looked at, and I hope didn't scare you off on things to be aware of and the risks and so on, it is one of the best ways to grow the business in a substantive way, because you get cash flow, you get expertise, you get customers, you get products and services, all in the mix. You don't have to build any of that. It's all there waiting for you for the taking. You finance the deal over a period of time, and you pay the financing out of the profits that are going to come to you from doing the deal. Do it.
Amazing. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for those wonderful answers. And thank you, everyone, for your questions.
All right. Well, thank you all, Dahlia. Thank you all for coming. Dahlia, thank you for being a moderator for us today. Drop your email in the chat window. Send us a request. Let us know if you want to book time to have an intro call. If you want to, you're just looking for information, fine with me. I'm happy to talk.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good week.